So today I'm going to be covering a game that happened recently between Magnus Carlsen and Richard Rapport, where Magnus Carlsen actually lost in only 23 moves, so it's a spectacular game. Let's get into it. E4 by Magnus, C6 by Black, initiating the Carlsen defense. We get D4, we get an exchange Carlsen with bishop to D3, knight F6, developing H3, prophylactic move, obviously stopping bishop to G4, knight to C6. Now, knight F3 is an alternative to guarding D4, but theory has it that C3 is better because it restricts this knight development. The knight can go to F3 later, and this knight will develop to D2 after getting this bishop out. So, E5 by Black, and obviously you have to take, because if you don't, E4 is going to be really bad. So, here you don't want to move back to C2 because that's giving your opponent too much time and tempo, so you go Queen E2. Now, Queen E7 is a very natural move here and probably the best move, but Black chooses a much more classy way of playing, and Knight E4, which looks like a bad move on the surface because it looks like it just loses a pawn for absolutely no reason. But after bishop to D6, you think you might win a piece with F4 taking advantage of this pin, but you're actually not because, you forgot about your king. Your diagonal's too weak, your king moves, and now Black can simply castle, because you can't take on E5 or else your queen will be lost. And after that, rook E8, knight G6, king's not safe, everything's bad for white. Magnus obviously does not take, instead plays a bishop to B5 check. We have bishop to D7, knight to F3. You cannot take this knight because I take with the pawn, and now you'll lose this knight. So, knight to G6, bishop to E3, developing, bishop to D6. I mean, these two bishops look pretty nice together. Knight BD2. I mean, castling was also an option, but might as well get your last piece developed. Now Black castles, and again, castling is probably one of the best moves, but Magnus chooses to play bishop takes D7, queen takes D7, obviously because he wants to castle next. No, he plays the mistake rook D1. I don't know why he thought that rook D1 was better than castling, but maybe he wanted to give extra support to D2. Maybe he saw something in the future, but I think the best explanation is that he wanted to get something going on the D file because the queen's right on the opposite side of that. So maybe knight takes E4, and then you take advantage of this pinned bishop. Maybe Magnus saw something that we couldn't see. I think he might have just forgot about his king, just based on what happens in this game. So we get rook F to E8, the obvious reply. I mean, the queen and king are on the same file, and the rook's on the other side. So Magnus plays the only move, knight takes E4. Castling actually does not work in this position because of knight to F4, knight to C3, and everything's being hit. Your queen's being hit. You can't take this knight because you'll lose your queen, and if you try to move your queen, you don't take this rook. You give a check, and then you take this bishop, and the position's absolutely crushing for Black. So knight takes E4, only move. Rook takes E4, and surely now Magnus decides to castle. No, he tried to be in an attacking mood because it's a rapid game, and if you notice, he doesn't actually have that much time on the clock. So he chooses knight to G5, attacking the rook, and now the perfect world for white here is if Black simply moves back, white can castle and get on with life. But the problem is that Black can play knight to F4, counterattacking the queen. You cannot take the rook. And now Magnus goes queen to F3. Now there's only one reply that can hold the advantage for Black, and I'll give you a chance to pause the video and find it. It's the brilliant queen to B5. You're just letting this rook hang, because if you take this rook, you will lose your queen. Take on E4. You try to go queen to G4. Well, first of all, I should explain why you can't take this pawn. It's because queen to E2 will be mate, so this queen has to keep on guarding that. So you go queen to G5, but now there's H5, protected by the knight, and there's simply no way you can guard this square without losing your queen. So instead of taking the rook, we get G3 by Magnus, a great move, because if this knight moves, you can simply take the rook for free, as it will no longer be threatening the checkmate on e2 with the queen. But the problem is black can counterattack the knight on g5 with f6. And now, obviously, you take the knight. I mean, Magnus only has 14 seconds on the clock here compared to Rapport's 8 minutes and 13 seconds. So Magnus has to play fast. He just captures, gets some time on the clock. And you might ask why he didn't play f5. I mean, I think he thought that there'd be too much pressure and that eventually he'd have to give up this pawn, so might as well just take an extra pawn and be a pawn up. But the problem is rook f8 comes anyway, and now, your queen's not safe. Queen to g2 by Magnus. The immediate reaction for any intermediate folks out there would probably be queen to e2, but the problem with queen to e2 is that there's simply rook takes e3. You decide to take with the queen, rook e8, and your queen's pinned. And then you think you're smart, and you decide to take with the pawn, and then your king gets hit with bishop to g3. The rook controls the f-file. You move your king up to d2. Queen takes b2 comes, but not even queen takes b2, although that's probably winning as well. Rook f2, and your queen gets pinned anyway. So Magnus cannot go queen to e2. He goes queen to g2. The computer obviously is like, you might as well just take this rook and take the rook and bishop for the queen. But, I mean, Magnus has 23 seconds. He probably wanted to keep the game going on a little longer. Unfortunately, it only lasts for about 2 more moves. Rook f to e8, and now, I mean, this is why Magnus should just castled when he had the chance. Queen to f1, a last try by Magnus. Better was rook at d2. You'll see why. Queen takes b2. Gotta defend that b2 pawn. Rook d2. Hold on a little bit longer. Still losing. But queen to f1 is the same as resigning. And after rook d2, Magnus just resigns. Yes. He played his move and then resigned. And that's simply because rook takes e3. Block with the rook. Bishop g3. Check. King can't move anywhere. Block with the rook. Queen takes e2. Checkmate. Magnus resigns and loses the game in only 23 moves.